Hello, my name is Adrian Harper, and I'm 25 years old. This is the story of how I turned pain into power and hatred into love. But it wasn't always this way. For most of my life, I lived under the shadow of shame, rejection, and loneliness. Growing up in a small, conservative town felt like a never-ending nightmare for someone like me. From a young age, I knew I was different, and so did everyone else. The way I walked, talked, and expressed myself made me stand out, but not in a way anyone admired. My parents, Dana and Richard Harper, seemed like the perfect loving parents to outsiders, but behind closed doors, their love always came with conditions. "You're such a disappointment, Adrian," my father would sneer whenever I failed to meet his rigid expectations of what a real man should be. My mother wasn't any better. She rarely shouted, but the way she avoided eye contact, as if I wasn't worth looking at, cut even deeper. Then there were my brothers, Jason and Luke, the Golden Boys, athletic, confident, and everything my parents celebrated. Me? I was the family's dirty little secret. School was no escape. If anything, it was worse. Kids can be cruel, and in my case, they were relentless. Every day felt like a battlefield where I was always the loser. "Adrian the Freak," they'd chant, laughing as they shoved my books to the ground or trapped me in the locker room. Teachers pretended not to notice, and friends? They vanished the moment the bullying began. But the worst pain came from home. My parents might not have called me names outright, but their disappointment was clear in every word and glance. "Why can't you just be normal?" my mother would mutter, thinking I couldn't hear. I heard. I always heard. For years, I tried to change. I buried who I really was under layers of lies, suppressing everything about myself to fit the mold they wanted. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. And with every failed attempt, I lost pieces of myself. The breaking point came on a frigid December evening. I had just come home from work, tired, defeated, and already struggling to make ends meet. My father was waiting in the living room, his face a mask of fury. "Adrian, I'm sick of you embarrassing this family," he shouted. His words cut sharper than usual that night, and something inside me snapped. I didn't argue or cry. I simply packed a bag, grabbed my wallet, and walked out the door. My mother called after me, but her tone was filled with frustration, not concern. "Where do you think you're going?" she demanded. I didn't answer. I didn't owe them an explanation. Walking away from the only home I'd ever known was terrifying, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of freedom. I had no plan, no money, and no idea what was next. All I knew was that I couldn't spend another moment living for people who didn't care about me. That night, in a rundown motel room with nothing but my thoughts, I made a promise to myself. I would change my life. I would become someone they couldn't ignore, someone they'd regret turning their backs on. What followed were the hardest days of my life. The little money I had ran out within days, leaving me homeless and aimless in the city. I spent nights sleeping on park benches, using my jacket as a blanket, and scraping together what little food I could find. Hunger gnawed at me constantly, and rejection stung every time I was turned away from a job interview. One evening, while sitting outside a community center, I overheard a group talking about an LGBTQ+ support group. At first, I hesitated. Years of shame and fear had conditioned me to hide who I was, but I had nothing left to lose. The next day, I walked into that meeting, my heart pounding with nerves. The room was simple, just a circle of chairs and people who, like me, looked unsure. For the first time, I heard stories of people who had faced struggles like mine and emerged stronger. For the first time, I felt seen. That group became my lifeline. They helped me find a shelter to stay in, and one member, Sam, even referred me to a job at a local cafe. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I worked tirelessly, saving every dollar I could and rebuilding my life, one step at a time. One night after my shift, I sat in my small shelter room, scrolling through my phone. I stumbled on a story about a man who built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. His journey resonated deeply. If he could do it, why couldn't I? I didn't have money or connections, but I had time and determination. I decided to teach myself skills that could open doors. Every free moment was spent learning, watching online tutorials, reading articles, and practicing on borrowed library computers. I dove into graphic design, marketing, and social media management, absorbing everything like a sponge. Progress was slow, and giving up often felt tempting. But every small victory kept me going. My first freelance gig, designing a logo, paid just $50, but it felt like a fortune. That one job led to others, and soon I had a growing portfolio. A year after leaving home, I landed my first major client, a local startup needing a branding package. The pay was modest, but the experience was invaluable. I gave it my all, and when the project succeeded, word spread. I moved out of the shelter into a tiny studio apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time, I didn't worry about food or a place to sleep. Stability felt amazing, but I wasn't satisfied. I wanted more, not just for myself, but to prove my worth to everyone who doubted me. With each success, my confidence grew. I started networking, attending events, and pitching ideas to bigger clients. Some doors closed, but others opened, and I seized every opportunity. Within a few years, I transitioned from struggling freelancer to business owner. My company specialized in digital marketing and branding, gaining a reputation for excellence. By age 30, I was recognized as one of the city's top entrepreneurs. The money and fame were great, but what mattered most was building everything on my own terms. By 30, my name, Adrian Harper, was widely known. My company thrived, and I was wealthier than I'd ever dreamed. My story was featured in magazines and on TV, from homeless to CEO. Yet, despite my success, a part of me still felt incomplete. One afternoon, heading to a meeting, I spotted a familiar figure on the sidewalk. My mother. She looked older, her face lined with worry. When our eyes met, she froze. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice trembling. A flood of emotions hit me. Anger, sadness, and a surprising longing. Before I could respond, she broke down in tears. "We were wrong," she said. "Your father and I, we were so wrong." She explained how, after I left, the family fell apart. My brothers moved on, and the house felt empty. Seeing my success forced my parents to confront their mistakes. A week later, my parents came to my office. My father, the man who once called me a disappointment, now stood before me in tears. "I'm sorry, son," he said, his voice cracking. "I couldn't see the incredible person you've always been. Part of me wanted to reject them as they had rejected me, but I remembered the pain of being cast aside. Forgiveness wasn't for them, it was for me. I'm willing to move forward," I told them, "but you must accept me as I am. Not who you wanted me to be." They agreed, and we slowly rebuilt our relationship. A year later, I stood on stage at a charity event, receiving an award for my contributions to the LGBTQ+ community. My parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride. The same people who once scorned me were now my biggest supporters. As I looked out at the audience, I reflected on my journey, the pain, struggles, and triumphs. I had turned my life around not to prove anyone wrong, but to show myself that I was worthy of love and respect. After the event, my mother hugged me tightly. "Adrian, I'm so proud of you," she said. For the first time, I believed her.